Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, our mission is, well, it's pretty specific. We're tackling what happens when standard medical screening meets a mind that isn't standard at all. We're diving into routine cognitive health checks. You know, those yearly assessments trying to track aging or decline, and exploring why. For neurodivergent folks, especially those with AuDHD and gestalt language processing, these tests can honestly become a real trap.
Yeah, it's often more than just like a bad fit. The source material we looked at paints this really painful picture. A system built for one kind of thinking just crashes against a cognitive style it can't measure,
Right.
and the result, sometimes it's actual trauma.
Exactly. And let's set that scene first, because the environment itself is a big part of this whole issue.
Definitely.
You know the drill.
Yeah.
That clinical milestone check, fluorescent lights humming, maybe a clock ticking too loudly, that feeling of being watched.
That brisk professional smile.
Right. And the purpose underneath seems valid: risk management, tracking cognitive decline. Especially, like in our source, for someone with a history of serious head impacts, contact sports, fighting, things that do warrant checking in.
Yeah, that history demands some level of vigilance, for sure.
But the person in our source material, they went through the whole thing, played the game.
Right. And on paper, according to the clipboard, they passed. They managed to hold it together, deliver the performance asked of them.
But the real cost,
Yeah.
the one that hit later, it was a complete system collapse. Hours afterwards, we're talking meltdown, panic attack. The source called it the body's revolt against hours of enforced performance.
Oof. Yeah, that delayed reaction is so common.
And the insight that's really guiding our deep dive today comes from the person themselves looking back. They said, "I did not fail. The test failed to notice how I think."
That hits hard, and it's really the core conflict, isn't it? That's what we need to unpack.
Absolutely. Okay, let's get into it. Segment 1, the standard cognitive gauntlet.
Okay, let's break down this standard approach and, why it's almost immediately hostile to certain minds.
So you walk into that room, and boom, you're running through this standardized script. Usually it's something like the MMSE or the MoCA, right?
Yep, those are the common ones.
What are the specific tasks? What makes up this cognitive gauntlet?
Well, it's this very sterile sequence. It's designed really to break thought down into these tiny measurable pieces.
Okay.
So you start with orientation. What's the date, the day, where are we? Then word recall is classic. Remember apple, table, penny, and you got to spit them back out later.
Right, the infamous list recall.
Then there's concentration, usually tested by subtracting sevens backward from 100.
Ugh, yeah, that one.
And then, the clock drawing. Draw a clock face, put the hands at 10 past 11.
Okay. And then those fluency tasks.
Yeah, name as many animals as you can in a minute. Or words starting with F or maybe S. All against the clock.
So on the surface, it sounds like it's covering memory, attention, executive function. Seems thorough, right?
That's the idea, yeah.
But you mentioned speed. If speed is the main measure of health here, what are these tests really rewarding?
They're rewarding compression and linearity. They demand that you split complex thoughts or memories into these little fragments and then switch between tasks really fast under pressure. Think about that serial sevens task. It's not just math, right? It's a specific kind of dual tasking. You need working memory, attention shifting, and really strict linear focus all at once.
Yeah, okay.
For a neurodivergent mind, maybe one juggling ADHD processing demands on top of everything else, that specific combination is almost designed for failure. It doesn't accurately assess what you know.
So the environment isn't neutral, speed equals health.
Yeah.
And that brings us right to the core mismatch, doesn't it? It's the neurotype clash.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the gestalt language processor, or
Yeah.
GLP. When a test demands fragmented recall, give me that one word. What's the fundamental conflict for a mind that stores information in, like, whole scenes or scripts?
It's like trying to run incompatible software. A GLP mind is often story-based. Information gets encoded and pulled back out through these rich, layered stories, full scripts. Even the rhythm and tone, the prosody, they hold holes of experience.
Okay.
But the tests demand they instantly unpack that whole, find one tiny decontextualized piece, like a single word totally removed from its original scene, and produce it. Now, under pressure,
Wow. Yeah.
it becomes this theater of distortion. Their knowledge might be vast and deep, but it's invisible unless they can somehow repackage it into this fragmented structure that just isn't how their brain works naturally.
And the ADHD part of the AuDHD diagnosis, that seems to be what really pushes the system from just distorting the picture to causing an actual collapse.
That's often the trigger, yeah. It's like the engine behind the performance dip. Tests that rely heavily on strict timing or keeping vigilant focus, they're incredibly punishing.
Right.
Time pressure eats up your executive bandwidth. It just depletes your cognitive resources so fast. So when performance tanks in that situation, it's usually not a sign of low ability or, actual cognitive decline.
It's the test itself causing the problem.
It's the structure failing to give the person the time they need to actually access and organize what they know. The assessment stops measuring brain function and starts measuring how well you tolerate anxiety and being rushed.
And we absolutely have to talk about that other critical piece from the source material, the traumatic brain injury history.
Yes, super important.
Years of head impacts from sports. These standard screens, they're just not set up to factor in that kind of complex legacy, are they?
Not really, no. A TBI often leaves these subtle cumulative changes, things like slightly slower processing speed or getting fatigued much quicker mentally. But the tests kind of assume today's performance reflects this single stable baseline. They don't tease apart the different reasons why someone might be performing a certain way.
So if someone seems slower today,
it could be anything. A mix of the old injury, maybe they didn't sleep well, maybe the fluorescent lights are just frying their system, plus the stress of being watched so closely.
Yeah.
The source material nails this point. We have to remember that not all delay is decay. Some of it is just the ongoing cost of the brain's history, the scars it carries, and the sheer effort it takes to mask those challenges.
Which leads us perfectly into thinking beyond just the tasks themselves. Let's get into segment 3. Context and neuroception. The hidden costs of just being in that assessment room.
Right, because the first hurdle is often just the power dynamic.
How so?
Well, the second a neurodivergent person walks into that room, there's often this immediate shift. You go from being, hopefully, a collaborator in your own healthcare to being a subject, someone being assessed, often through this lens of what's wrong, what's missing, deficit-based.
And the nervous system picks up on that instantly.
Instantly. It can feel like a threat.
This gets into neuroception, right? That subconscious scanning for safety or danger.
Exactly. It's your body sensing threat before your thinking brain even labels it.
So what kinds of things in that clinical setting trigger that danger signal for a nervous system that might already be hypervigilant?
Unpredictability is a big one. Those rapid-fire questions jumping all over the place.
Okay.
Abrupt shifts in topic with no warning. Sometimes non-consented touch, like a clinician putting a hand on your arm unexpectedly or shoving a clipboard at you. And a huge one, absolutely critical, being misnamed or misgendered right at the start, even if the correct info is right there in the chart.
Wow, yeah, that signals a fundamental lack of safety.
It signals danger, lack of basic respect. The nervous system reads that and immediately kicks into protection mode, freeze, fawn, maybe flight. And when that happens, your thinking brain, it basically goes offline. You're not struggling with the task anymore. Your body is just trying to survive the perceived threat.
And this internal cost just builds up silently, right?
Yeah.
Especially if someone struggles with alexithymia and interoception. Can you quickly define those for us?
Sure. Alexithymia is basically difficulty identifying and describing your own emotions. And interoception is difficulty sensing or tracking your internal physical state, like hunger, pain, fatigue, stress building up.
So if you can't really feel that pressure cooker inside you heating up.
Right. If your internal volume knob is kind of broken, your nervous system can't give you those early warnings. It can't signal, hey, back off, this is too much, until it's already past the break-it point.
Which makes that eventual meltdown or panic attack almost inevitable. It's the body finally screaming the message it couldn't whisper earlier.
That's exactly it. That's the autism tax, as some call it.
The cost of just trying to perform.
The cost of sustained, forced performance in an environment that feels hostile. And it's a cost the clinical score completely ignores. It's invisible to the test.
And the source detailed one massive piece of context that was ignored.
Yeah.
Completely undermining the assessment.
Yeah.
The hormonal context.
Yeah.
Specifically, HRT hormone replacement therapy.
Yes. This is crucial.
Why does ignoring someone's estrogen or testosterone levels make a cognitive assessment basically incomplete?
Because these hormones are fundamental to neurochemistry. They play a huge role in neuroprotection. They directly influence things like verbal memory, attention, core cognitive functions.
Okay.
So if you ignore HRT, you're ignoring a primary factor shaping how that person's brain is literally functioning on the day of the test.
Right.
And then you add in the chronic stress that often comes with gender-based scrutiny or the impact of being constantly misgendered, You're left with what the source called a snapshot of performance divorced from context.
The question the source poses is just devastatingly simple, isn't it? If you're assessing my cognitive health but ignoring the very things shaping my brain chemistry, my hormones, my stress levels, my TBI history.
And what exactly are you measuring?
Yeah, what are you measuring? And the answer, depressingly often, seems to be just performance under duress, compliance, not actual cognitive ability.
Exactly. And ignoring this isn't just incomplete, it's a form of scientific erasure. It treats the person like a machine, totally separate from their life, their body, their context.
Okay, so let's try and connect this lived experience, this painful reality, to what the broader research tells us. We do have some data on cognitive aging in older autistic adults, say 50 to 80. What are the key findings?
Well, the data does offer some important validation and some nuance, too. There was a study by Stewart and colleagues in 2022.
Okay.
They found this group tended to have lower scores on things like working memory, certain types of visual memory, and processing speed. And this is critical, not on simple reaction time or verbal reasoning.
So that seemed to support the idea that the difficulty isn't necessarily raw intellect or basic speed, but rather those tasks demanding rapid, fragmented processing under pressure.
Precisely. It points towards the type of task being the barrier.
And what about that feeling of brain fog? Lots of neurodivergent people report feeling mentally heavy or foggy. Does that feeling always line up with objective decline on tests?
That's a fascinating area. Tornvliet and others looked at this in 2024. They found that subjective complaints, that feeling of brain fog, actually tracked more closely with things like depression, high stress levels, and poor sleep than they did with most objective test score losses. There was maybe a modest link to visual memory, but mostly the fog seemed linked to those other factors.
So that's actually quite hopeful, isn't it? That mental heaviness might be more about burnout or current stress rather than irreversible decline.
Exactly. It could be a signal of ecological stress, fatigue, not necessarily neurodegeneration. A sign the environment is draining, not that the brain is failing.
And maybe the most reassuring finding came from longitudinal data, following people over time.
Yes, the longitudinal work by Tornvliet again in 2023. It showed that, generally, autistic and non-autistic adults tended to show cognitive changes in parallel over time. There wasn't a signal suggesting accelerated decline in the autistic group.
Okay, that's a huge relief to hear. But there's always a but, isn't there? It brings us back to the source material's core issue. Who are these studies actually managing to measure?
That's the major caveat. These studies primarily end up measuring the people who can tolerate the demands of the lab environment.
Right.
So the samples often lean towards people who might be described as having higher IQs, fewer sensory sensitivities, people who can comply with long, structured testing sessions.
So they might miss the very people struggling the most with the standard tests.
Exactly. The research often fails to capture how things like sensory overload, that intense time pressure, and the constant demand for fragmentation fundamentally change what's being measured for a large part of the autistic population. The testing environment itself is still built on non-autistic norms.
Which means we're still potentially mismeasuring the people who need the most understanding and support.
Pretty much, yeah. We get an incomplete picture.
Okay, so we've described the problem pretty thoroughly. Let's pivot to solutions. Segment 5. How do we build a neuro-affirming assessment ecology? Where do we even start?
I think the fundamental shift has to be this. Comfort isn't a luxury. It's not an afterthought or a nice to have. It has to be a baseline condition for getting accurate information.
Comfort as a prerequisite for valid assessment. I like that.
That's the core idea. We stop trying to fix the person to fit the test, and instead, we redesign the environment.
Okay, so what does that look like practically?
Start with the sensory basics. Low sensory spaces, soft lighting, get rid of the fluorescence, no strong perfumes, less visual clutter. Make the space feel safe, not sterile.
And the pacing.
Predictable pacing is key. Let the person know what's coming, and build in scheduled breaks. Make them part of the standard protocol, not something the person has to awkwardly ask for.
Right, not feeling like you're being difficult by needing a pause.
Exactly. And then the tasks themselves need to change. We need to move away from rewarding fragmentation.
So ditching those random word lists.
Pretty much, or at least de-emphasizing them. Move towards things like scene-based or story-based recall. There are tests like the Rivermead Behavioral Memory Test, the RBMT3, that use more ecologically valid scenarios, things with context and relevance.
Okay, that makes sense. More like real life.
Yeah. And offer untimed tasks whenever possible. Or if it absolutely has to be a long assessment, break it up. Do it across multiple shorter sessions. Make it manageable.
And the whole way we measure the standard we compare against, that needs rethinking too.
Completely. We need to shift focus. Prioritize with in-person baselines over these rigid neurotypical population norms.
Meaning how someone is doing now compared to their own past performance.
Exactly. What matters is how are you doing today compared to you 6 months ago, not compared to some abstract average of a neurotype you don't even share.
Okay.
And we need to combine those scores with the full context: picture mood, sleep quality, pain levels, hormone status. Use tools like reliable change indices that look for meaningful shifts within that individual's profile. We should be looking for change, not just deficits against a norm.
That feels like a much more respectful and, frankly, more useful approach. Tracking change within context.
It's about curiosity, not just judgment.
Okay, this is powerful. Let's wrap up with some really actionable micro changes. What can someone facing one of these assessments do right now to advocate for themselves?
I think the most powerful tool is the access letter sent before the appointment even happens.
Okay, tell me more about that.
This isn't just like a polite heads up. It's basically you stating the conditions required for you to provide an accurate picture of your abilities. List your needs clearly.
Like what specifically?
Things like, I need a low-sensory room. Please ensure staff use my correct name and pronouns. I will require flexible pacing with short breaks every 20 minutes. Be specific.
So it frames these things not as favors, but as requirements for validity.
Precisely. And then during the test itself, if you feel that power dynamic creeping back in, or if a task feels completely overwhelming or nonsensical,
Yeah. What can you do then?
you can actually shift the dynamic a bit yourself. Try asking the clinician directly, maybe politely. Could you tell me what cognitive skill or construct you're measuring with this specific task?
Interesting. What does that do?
It often makes the assessor pause. They have to step back from just running the script and actually articulate the purpose of the task. It can subtly shift the interaction back towards collaboration, away from just compliance.
That's a smart tactic.
And just remember, these accommodations, they aren't special treatment. They are necessary features to ensure the test is actually valid for you. They're not exceptions for a difficult patient. They're standard requirements for good assessment.
This has been such a crucial deep dive. I feel like the goal really isn't just about finding ways to, tolerate broken tools better.
No.
It's about demanding and creating measures that are actually curious about how different minds work. Measures that are expansive, not just corrective and narrow. Measures that see context and treat access as fundamental.
Absolutely. And maybe a final thought for anyone listening who has experienced that kind of collapse, that meltdown or panic attack after a stressful assessment.
Yeah.
Please try to reframe what that meant. It likely wasn't a sign of your personal failure or some kind of weakness. It might have been an entirely predictable design outcome of interacting with a system that's built on a deficit model, a system that refuses to see context.
Wow. A predictable design outcome.
Think about it. What changes if you view your own intense stress responses not as your failing, but as accurate protective signals? Your body responding appropriately to an environment that feels hostile or invalidating. That internal knowledge, your body's assessment of safety. Maybe that's ultimately more trustworthy, more truthful than any score generated without context.